Today, we're going to wrap up on the physiology side of things, specifically physiology of the exercise. Last week, we talked a little bit about the physiology from a tissue healing standpoint, briefly for our manual therapies. Today, we're going to now talk about the physiology that governs the exercise that we do. So, one of the problems that we have, and I found myself being guilty of this until very recently, is using the word strength as kind of a catch-all. It's a strength problem. They have a strength issue. When we say the word strength, though, oftentimes we use that one singular word without actually passing on what we truly mean. We just say the word strength and hope that it encapsulates everything else and hopes that the person that we're talking to doesn't ask us, well, what do you mean by that? So when we talk about strength, what we have to understand when we hear somebody say a strength issue, there's a lot of things that we have to unwrap with that. First and foremost, if I say strength issues, I could be talking about preventing atrophy. Rewind what we talked about a little bit last week. We immobilize somebody, a boot, a knee immobilizer, a sling, crutches. We know that as soon as we initiate any kind of immobilization protocol to protect the tissue, to protect the joint for whatever reason, we know that when we start that, within 48 hours, there's going to be a significant onset of atrophy. That's going to happen 100% of the time. We can't pretend it's not going to happen. We can't hope that it doesn't. We can't hope that this person's physiology is different. We immobilize, 48 hours, significant dramatic negative effects. So, in that instance, strength is a priority. But, and actually, let's unpack that a second. What's actually the priority isn't strength, it's the prevention of atrophy. We know it's going to happen. We have to take proactive steps to prevent it from happening by addressing strength. Fast forward, we have a post-op ACL patient. We know that their quad is shut down. We know that they have atrophy because of this surgery. We know all of this is going to happen. We know their quad's not going to work until that swelling's out of it. We need to work on quad strength. Later on in that patient's rehab time with us, we're going to have to work on the hamstring to quad ratio. We have to work on that strength and balance. So we use all these terms, but those, what I just said, are two completely different things. Even though I use the word strength to describe both, it's a poor descriptor. So in that first example, where we have to get the quad going because it's shut off because of the spinal reflex that inhibits the quad when swelling kicks in, first and foremost, to get the quad to even be able to have, even for us to even be able to have conscious control of that quad, we have to get the swelling out of it. If we don't get the swelling out of the knee, there is no exercise that we can do that can overcome a spinal reflex. You can't quad set your way through a reflex. You can't top-down process, think your way through a reflex. You can't leverage neuroplasticity to offset that inhibitory reflex. The other problem, we can't use bottom-up techniques. We can't use a tissue approach to offset that spinal inhibitory reflex. So if we have swelling on the knee, the only thing that we can do to get that quad to actually activate is to get the effusion gone. Because until the effusion's gone, we have no way of overcoming that spinal inhibitory reflex. Once that reflex is gone, then we have to actually work on force production. We have to work on the propagation of action potentials to actually create a conscious contraction of that quad. Once we've established that, now we have to work on the ability to generate force when we do that. We have to increase force production. At the same time, though, we have to create tissue atrophy because we have to offset tissue atrophy because they have been immobilized. Even if we take a very aggressive approach to offset atrophy, we know that it's still going to happen. The difference is instead of a 20% loss of cross-sectional area of the muscle, we're hoping to drop that to only a 10% loss. We're hoping to cut it in half. But we know it's going to happen, so we're going to have to address hypertrophy. So we're going to have to do some kind of interventions to address hypertrophy. But until we have force production, we can't get adequate stimulus to create hypertrophy. So force production and hypertrophy are two different things. And we'll talk about the variables and how we manipulate those instead. Then we have local muscular endurance, which isn't the same as cardiovascular endurance or systemic endurance. It's the ability of that quad to repeatedly contract over time and have the energy stores locally to be able to do that. Yes, I can contract that quad one time and get a good quadricep contraction, but can I do that repeatedly over time? If the answer is yes, we've addressed muscular hypertrophy. But how often have we done something and after 4 or 5 reps, that person's just exhausted and we start to see the quality of that contraction start to go away? It's not necessarily a force production issue. They showed us they can do it, but now they're showing us that when we ask them to string 3 or 4 of those together, or 5 or 6 or 10 or 15 contractions together, they can no longer do it because of an endurance issue. And we're starting to talk about an endurance issue. We're not talking about force production. They showed us they can do that. We're talking about an energy system issue, a local store of ATP issue within the cytoplasm within the cell. All of those, how we address each one of those, are completely different based off of the variables that we're going to talk about. And then we get into the systemic endurance, anaerobic endurance, aerobic endurance, long duration, steady state type endurance, systemic power, speed, and skill. The problem, especially, and before I've said the all-encompassing healthcare, this is very specific to an athletic training problem. Very specific to athletic trainers. We get that person that comes out of the boot, we get that person that comes out of surgery, and we start doing our rehab with them. We address effusion, we address swelling, we start to get some basic level stuff going on, and then we jump straight to sports specific. And we jump straight to sports specific, we're jumping all the way down here first. We're now working on skills because it's a sports specific skill. We're layering skills on top of stuff that they don't have. And when we do that, they get frustrated. And what happens? We initiate a neuroplastic change where the nervous system doesn't have the foundation of things that it needs, and we're actually making the problem worse. So when we talk about strength, we have to very specifically understand what we're talking about. Are we preventing atrophy? Are we working on force production? Are we working on hypertrophy? Or are we working on local muscular endurance? Because each one of those adaptations, I can use a deadlift for each one of those. So if you're watching me do an exercise, I pick the deadlift. I can use a deadlift to offset atrophy. I can use a deadlift to improve force production. I can use a deadlift to generate hypertrophy. And I can use that exact same deadlift to promote muscular endurance. You watching, all you see is me doing a deadlift. You don't know what I'm targeting. When I start manipulating some of the modifiable variables within how I'm having that person do that deadlift, when I say how I'm having the person do the deadlift, it's still the same deadlift, but how heavy of a weight am I lifting? How many reps am I doing? How many sets am I doing? How much rest am I giving? When am I doing that within their program? All of those are going to be what then dictate, is that deadlift offsetting atrophy, generating force, creating hypertrophy, or improving local energy stores. One exercise, but all those variables dictate what the outcome is going to be, which is why that person standing in front of me, it's a strength issue. Wonderful. That tells me nothing. I need to know which one of these it is. Because until I know which one of these it is, it's just a random deadlift that I can get off of the internet that's not going to change anything. I have to understand the physiologic adaptation of strength that I'm trying to target so that then I can program that exercise, whatever the exercise is, appropriately to leverage the physiology to create the physiological adaptation down the road. This is also why 3 sets of 10 never works in today's world. We do 3 sets of 10, you should see hypertrophy. We don't. The reason that we don't is 3 sets of 10 is just 2 of the 5 variables that we can manipulate. And it's not the most important of the 2 of those 5 variables to drive hypertrophy. Oh, what's the next slide? Uh-oh, my clicker's not working today. So when we talk about the timing, and this is why um, this is why knowing what the problem is as soon as possible is so important, because these adaptations take a long time. Now you notice here, atrophy. Put somebody in the boot, within 48 hours, you're starting to see significant changes in atrophy. I just tested a kid yesterday, got hurt last Monday in a soccer game. I saw him yesterday, so exactly 7 days after surgery. Sorry, 7 days after his injury. He was on crutches, he was put in a knee immobilizer for 4 days. Then he just kind of weaned out by himself because he didn't like the crutches and walking in the immobilizer was too slow. I saw him yesterday, 7 days after his surgery. He had a 3 centimeter loss of muscle mass in his quad, right side to left side. When I tested the strength of his hamstrings, 45% difference. When I put him on our leg press to see overall lower body strength difference, left side to right side, 33% loss of strength on that injured side. No swelling, full range of motion. If he walked in here right now and I put him on the table and I told you guys to assess his knee, maybe the only thing you would find is he's lacking just a little bit of in-range knee flexion. But that's kind of hard. You have to be paying attention to find that one. It's a relatively benign knee. But even with that, because of the crutches, the knee immobilizer for 4 days, we now have issues that are going to take me 4 to 6 weeks to offset. Because that's how long it takes to see hypertrophy develop. We can see strength improve. If somebody's an untrained individual and you've never been exposed to strength training, I can get strength improvements within 2 to 3 weeks. You have a relatively fresh nervous system that's never been exposed to this. So if I'm doing my job, your nervous system, this is a new and novel environment. Your nervous system is going to respond quickly to that. Whereas if you trained before, you have an extensive training history, we go and we do deadlifts. This isn't a new and novel situation for you. You've been doing deadlifts for a while. It's harder to get those adaptations because your body has become very efficient at deadlifting. It's not a new and novel situation. It's called Tuesday. We do this every Tuesday. So it takes us longer to see those results. So in an untrained individual, we can see strength improvements in 2 to 3 weeks. A trained individual, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks for their physiology and that nervous system to kick in and for us to see that. When it comes to endurance and when it comes to power, we're going to see an improvement, but it's not going to happen until we get into the weeks out. How many weeks? Well, it depends, because when we talk about endurance and power, it's very specific to the thing that we're trying to improve. If I want to add 3 inches to your vertical, it's probably going to take me, depending on if you're untrained or trained, anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks to see a significant improvement in your vertical. If tomorrow's the NFL Combine and we need to add 3 inches onto your vertical jump, I can show you some very specific techniques on the vertex to add 2 to 3 inches on your vertical jump right now, but it's not going to carry over to you being able to play football or basketball. I can show you how to cheat the test and actually improve your vertical jump in the moment, but it's not an actual improvement. To get those physiological improvements, again, we're talking weeks. Why is this important? We see the negative happen within 48 hours. To offset that, 4 weeks. 2 weeks best case in an untrained individual. This is why, and this is a message. I might lose my job at Mercy over this one because they're going to fire me, because I'm going to create so much agitation and irritation. It's going to be easier for them to get rid of me than to make the changes. But my mission in life right now is to create a policy and to create a change that if you're a sports medicine provider, a physician, a PA, an AT, an MA, anybody within the sports medicine world, of Mercy here in Springfield, regionally, and system-wide. If you put somebody in a boot, if you put somebody in a sling, if you put somebody in an immobilized, if you put them on crutches, and if you don't give them, at the time they walk out of our facility, a plan to offset the atrophy and to offset the problems that you just created, we're going to write you up. Because the whole reason we put them in the boot is to protect them, to prevent worse things from happening, right? Well, if you put them in a boot, we know worse things are going to happen. And we know those worse things are going to happen are going to take 4 to 6 weeks to fix. And we know that 4 to 6 weeks, if you come in and you see me for 4 weeks, you're seeing me twice a week. That's 8 visits. What's 8 times 500? I literally don't know. That's why I asked you guys. Week 1 is 1,000. It's $4,000. Somebody's paying $4,000 to offset this problem that PA created, that physician created, that MA created by putting somebody in a boot and letting them go home for 3 or 4 days and not do anything. That's a $4,000 problem. That's 4 hours of that patient's life they have to give up to offset a problem that was created that we know is going to happen. We do need to protect. We do have to put people in these we do have to immobilize people. But we also know the problems are going to come. We have to offset that because our only option to offset that, if we ignore it, is a week-long issue that's going to be very expensive. And it's just better healthcare to have started day one. So we can't keep our head in the sand when it comes to that. When we talk about the modifiable variables, exercise choice is the number one variable, but remember, exercise choice is the least important. Exercise order, when we program that exercise, within the hour, within 30 minutes, within the time frame in which we're working with that person, the volume, and then our frequency. And then rest and recovery is the fifth one. Now you're wondering, okay, where's sets and reps? Sets and reps fall underneath volume. So does intensity, how much weight's on the bar. How we manipulate these 4.5, 5 variables is going to determine what kind of physiological output we have, or physiologic adaptation we have. I can use a deadlift to offset atrophy. I can use a deadlift to promote hypertrophy. I can use a deadlift for strength. I can use a deadlift to promote muscular endurance. I can even use a variation of a deadlift called a kettlebell swing to work on muscle power. So the exercise, I can use one exercise and change the other 3.5 variables and get very specific outcomes from that. And why I can do that comes back to a quote by Kelly Starrett. It's in one of his books. He's talked about it on one of his podcasts somewhere. I've heard it several places that he's talked before. Soft people are like obedient dogs. They'll do exactly what they're told. We just have to tell them to do the right thing, and they will adapt. Same thing with our nervous system. They will adapt. Within the muscular system, those adaptations are very specific to the training stimulus that we expose their system to. So again, that's where how much weight's on the bar, how many sets we're doing, how many reps we're doing, how much rest we're giving them in between each of those sets. All of that is what dictates the physiological adaptation, because our muscles, our muscular system is very specifically going to adapt to the imposed demand, which is that deadlift and how we program it. It's also why when we do the 3 sets of 10, we're not seeing any kind of results. We're really just wasting our time 90% of the time when we do that. Exercise does not, or the specific exercise does not determine the adaptation. Go back to the example I gave on the deadlift. The deadlift didn't generate the hypertrophy. The deadlift didn't generate the force production. The deadlift didn't generate the muscular endurance or the power change. The other variables I manipulated did. I just chose the deadlift. If somebody tells me they want to, if it's a post-op shoulder patient and we need to work on deltoid hypertrophy, I don't have a list of exercises that these are my deltoid hypertrophy exercises. The exercise does not determine the adaptation. How we execute, how we program that exercise is what determines the adaptation. But we do have to talk about exercise selection. Exercise selection comes down to two general types of exercise. Multi-joint exercises, and then either single joint or isolation type exercises. Multi-joint exercises typically utilize a larger degree of muscle mass, encompasses more joints, encompasses more body areas. Multi-joint exercises, typically, when they've been studied, they lead to a higher increase in testosterone and growth hormone compared to isolation-based exercise. And it goes back to the degree of muscle mass that's utilized to promote that movement. Multi-joint exercises are typically movement focused. When you're doing a barbell back squat, yes, you can go to any physiology or exercise physiology textbook, any muscle and fitness, and it's going to tell you that it's working the quads and the hamstrings and the glutes. And if you elevate the heels, it's going to make more of a quad focus. If you try to sit back more, there's going to be more posterior chain. All of that is, you can manipulate all of that. But what we're not talking about is the high degree of stabilization that is also having to take place while you're going to do this. Yes, we're putting an emphasis on the quads, the hamstrings, and the glutes, but the trunk, every muscle that attaches to the pelvis and the spine and the upper extremity is having to stabilize to keep that bar level and keep that bar balanced over our base of support. So with large multi-joint exercises, we typically also see significant stabilization required. This is also where we can start to integrate some of the fascial lines, some of the systemic approaches to movement that we can't get with the isolation type exercises. If I know somebody has a superficial backline issue and I specifically want to target the superficial backlines, I can pick exercises to specifically do that. As soon as I know that this is a spiral line issue, excuse me, as soon as I know this is a spiral line issue, I have a very specific set of exercises that fall into requiring the spiral line to be more active. As soon as you tell me that we need to emphasize the lateral line, what I hear in my head is we're going to have to spend some time in single leg, because that's when the lateral line is the most dominant, is when we're in single leg. So we can start having these conversations about integrating fascial lines with our larger multi-joint exercises. We can't do that with our isolation type exercise. Now, there is a time and place for single joint isolation type exercises. With these, we're focusing on an individual muscle. We can very selectively target what it is we're trying to improve. That post-op shoulder patient, we know they have deltoid atrophy. Do you think it's going to be important to very specifically target the deltoid to create hypertrophy in the deltoid at some point? Absolutely, because we need to increase the muscle mass of that deltoid. Can we do kettlebell presses? We can, but if hypertrophy is my goal, very specifically, if deltoid hypertrophy is my goal, the kettlebell press is not the first exercise I would choose to accomplish that. Now, I might use that later on when we're working on force production, but if I want to go after a very specific deltoid atrophy, it's not going to be a kettlebell press. Kettlebell press is a large multi-joint movement. I'm going to go after a single joint isolated type movement to very specifically target that deltoid. And then within the deltoid, is it the anterior fibers of the deltoid, the middle fibers of the deltoid, or the posterior fibers of the deltoid? Because that also is going to help me decide which exercise I want to do to get the very specific outcomes that I'm going for with hypertrophy. The nice thing about single joint exercises, they're significantly less technical. I love every patient every day should be doing some kind of biceps curl. Ankle sprain patient, we should be doing bicep curls. I'll explain that later on. Why do I love bicep curls so much? because it's a whole lot easier for me to teach you how to do a bicep curl than it is to do a kettlebell swing. I can hand you a dumbbell and I can have you go into town on those bicep curls. You can be getting in a significant amount of volume while I'm still over here trying to teach this person how to do a kettlebell swing. So by the time I've taught this person to do the exercise, you're done. And I don't have to worry about you doing it wrong. If you do a bicep curl wrong, well, either you hit yourself or there's really no, or you drop the weight. So those are exercises where if I'm having somebody do a single joint exercise, I'm not having to pay as much attention to them and be as much one-on-one with them because it's less technical and typically the risk of things going sideways is significantly less. Now, if somebody's doing an overhead barbell squat, I'm paying attention to what they're doing. I have to be engaged one-on-one with that because the risk is a lot higher with that one. So with our joint isolated exercises, that's something that it's like a USB. We can plug and go. We can give them that exercise. They can go to town. If they do it wrong, they're still going to get some benefits. The risks are relatively low. I don't need to be engaged with that. The multi-joint stuff, I need to be engaged with. I need to make sure they're doing those right. Multi-joint exercises, I'm going to be the exercise cops, the exercise police. I'm really paying attention to the technical components of that, making sure they can do it right and that they're doing it well while they're doing it. Single joint isolation, here's the exercise you need to do, go have fun. Make sure, I'll still pay attention to them, but I'm not being exercise cop with them. We might lose a little bit of range of motion. They might use a little bit more momentum with this one. They might be cheating a little bit. Wonderful. My goal is hypertrophy more often than not. Perfectly fine. Unstable surfaces, there's just no reason for it. Nope. If we're having a conversation about strength, now, hold on. Don't misquote me on that one. If we're having a conversation about strength and you're trying to create hypertrophy, create force, create locomuscular endurance, offset atrophy, or create muscle power, all the things that we encompass when we say the word strength. If the adaptation is one of those, we're going after strength, and you're using an unstable surface, you're just straight up being stupid. You are not going to create the adaptations that you want. Reason being, if I'm standing on an Eric's pad doing a back squat, now instead of all of my lower extremity muscles being focused on generating force, the thing I'm trying to do, now those muscles are having to offset and be devoted to now creating stability. So if my goal is strength, unstable surfaces are stupid. They do not enter the conversation with that. Now, if balance or coordination are part of the conversation, then we can have a conversation about using those unstable surfaces. But if I say, hey, why are you doing this exercise? And you use any of those words that we use to describe strength, and you're using an Eric's pad, I'm going to pick the Eric's pad up and I'm going to hit you on the head with it. And you better be lucky it's just an Eric's pad. Because you picked an exercise, your exercise selection, how you chose to do that is wasting that patient's time. Because it's not the right one at the right time. That makes sense? Only reason I say that, because in the world of athletic training, we love our Eric's pads, we love our Bosu balls, we love our unstable surfaces. There is a time and a place for them. Not when we're talking about strength, though. Okay? Number one thing, when it comes to what order we're going to put our exercises in, we have to know the adaptation that we want. How do we know the adaptation that we want? Well, we need to assess the individual to determine what the priority is. What's our rehab priority? If our rehab priority is hypertrophy, I can take that exercise and put it just about anywhere I want in the course of that rehab plan, and I can create hypertrophy. But if it's force production, I have to have it on the front end of what I'm doing. It has to be the first thing that we're working on in a rehab situation, because I need their nervous system to be fresh. Because remember, part of force production is nervous system action potential propagation. My nervous system has to be fresh and on board to effectively propagate to get the force production. With hypertrophy, I can do anything. We can put it anywhere. Muscular endurance probably fits later on. in what we're doing because it's all about energy systems, local energy systems. I need to tax them. I need to challenge them so that the body then has to adapt. So I might want to throw those in a little bit later. So that's why I have to know the adaptation I want to know when am I doing this deadlift. If you see me doing a deadlift with somebody and they just walked in the door, you know nothing else about what's going on. They walk in the door, I say, hey, how you doing? We do a couple things to kind of get them moving, and I'm doing a deadlift with them. You know I'm working on force production or power because I am doing that when their nervous system is fresh. If they've been here, we've done tons of other things, and it's now the middle towards the end of their time with me, and we're doing deadlifts. You know I'm probably working on hypertrophy or muscle endurance. Because now their nervous system's not fresh. Now I've put them into a little bit of a compromised position because we've done some other things. Now we're capitalizing on those hypertrophic changes or those local energy store changes. So the only way we know, though, is to determine which of those adaptations we want. Hypertrophy, force production, muscular endurance, or power. You have to understand that from the onset. We're going to talk about this more next week. This is the priority matrix, the different version of it. The other one was the landscape and all kinds of stuff. All I want you to pay attention to is the blue. So we have joint isolated strength, static strength, dynamic strength, hypertrophy, endurance, integration, and power. That's the direction that's the progression that we go when we see strength. Post-op ACL patient. Yeah, at some point we need to do deadlifts with them. But we also, at some point, need to make sure that that quad can fire. We need to make sure the quad, I know eventually the lower extremity has to be able to work in an integrated manner to produce a large thing. But before that happens, I need to make sure that that quadricep can be a quadricep. I need to make sure that it can create adequate force. I need to know that the hamstring can do stuff. I need to make sure the hamstring can actually contract and function like a hamstring. I need to know the same thing about the gastroc and the soleus. So early on, I might be doing some very isolated type exercises. That's fine early on. I might be doing some static things. We might be in a situation where we can't do squats. A post-op patient or a situation where the physician, their protocol says, I don't want this person squatting. We can still do stuff. I don't want this person deadlifting. Wonderful. As soon as you tell me you don't want them to deadlift, that's great. We're going to get into this position and we're going to statically spend time here. We're not going to deadlift, but we're going to do a lot of things here where we're statically having to control this in the presence of a dynamic upper body or in the presence of something else. I'm still operating within that protocol of not deadlifting. I just put them in a very specific posture, which is the bottom and deadlift shape, which is a variation of the vertical stance posture. So I might be doing some things statically, and then once I get to the point where it's appropriate, or once we get to the point within the protocol that we can do dynamic things, now when I have that person deadlift, and we actually connect point A with point B, they spent an hour and a half down here. They've got this. I don't have to worry about what the bottom of the deadlift looks like. We spent a ton of time down here doing all kinds of different things. Now they're going to be happy because they can actually deadlift, and they're not going to spend time there statically. So we can have them work on and build off of those static positions that we've created. We can take those joints that have been working in isolation, that quad that now has an action that can create force, that hamstring that can create force, that gastroc soleus that can create force, the glute that can create force. We're now putting all those together, and we're doing leg presses, or we're doing deadlifts, or we're doing squats. That's if the first time somebody does a deadlift, if that's their first exposure to strength, we're not doing it correctly. We're skipping lots of steps. We're making our job harder. It should be step 3. And then once we've done that, once we've got the force production, then we can really start to focus on, do we need to create hypertrophy, local muscular endurance, or power? Hypertrophy typically precedes endurance. It typically precedes power just because of the order in which, the way in which our body needs to function and have access to those attributes. We need to be able to stand up and move around all day and have the muscular endurance to be able to do that before we need to worry about how fast we can run and how fast we can go. We need to be able to show that we have the endurance to be able to be exposed to things before we can do that. The problem with endurance is before we can generate adequate amounts of strength over an extended period of time, which is what endurance is, we have to be able to generate adequate amounts of strength. We have to have strength before we can have endurance, which is one of the big downfalls if we go over to the Foster Student Rec Center, does the name of it? Foster? Yeah. If we go over to Foster right now and we see some people that are working on endurance, they're going to be doing all these, we're doing sets of 10 and 15 and 20 with light weights and all this stuff. That's wonderful. You're working on endurance. But if you don't have adequate levels of strength, you're not building endurance. You're just building really low level strength. And you're not going to be strong enough to do things. That's one of the problems with the running community. Is running is all about cardiovascular endurance, local muscular endurance. But they build it off of cardiovascular endurance, and that's not wrong. But you want to make any runner better at any distance, you introduce them to any level of strength training, their running is going to go through the roof. Because now we can we create force, we create adequate amounts of force, now they can maintain that force for a longer period of time. Instead of starting down here when the race starts, they're starting up here. We've already given them a performance enhancement bomb by making them stronger. And as they get fatigued and tired, they can get fatigued and tired at the same rate their opponent is, but they're still going to outperform them because they started at a higher level. So we can add strength and we can make almost any endurance athlete's times and performances better. You have to prioritize the priority. Again, we have to know what the adaptation is that we want. If hypertrophy is the focus, we have to be extremely clear that we're maintaining that as our priority. When we're talking adaptations to the nervous system has to be fresh. If we're talking strength, power, speed, or any kind of technical skill, we have to have a fresh nervous system. So if you tell me that post-op ACL patient, we're needing to create force production of the vastus medialis because they don't have a quadricep contraction, we have to do that extremely early in their rehab process. That person comes in today, we have to do that very early in their rehab time with us today when their nervous system is still fresh, because I need that action potential to be moving. I need their nervous system to be ready for this. If we're trying to improve somebody's vertical jump or we're trying to create power, again, we have to do this very early when the nervous system is fresh. We can't, can we do jumping stuff and can we work on power at the end of a workout? Absolutely. But you're not going to get power adaptations because it's not going to be quick. The movements are going to be slower. The nervous system is going to be compromised at that point. So if we're doing jumping type stuff, we're trying to improve power output, we have to do that early on. And all this is doing is preventing chaos in the nervous system. I'm going to go back to this first and prioritize the priority. This is one of the biggest mistakes I see clinicians make every single day. Again, my role at Mercy right now is more often than not, clinicians bring me problems. What can we do to fix those? And one I got recently, hey, we've been trying to get this person into our phase 2, our late stage rehab, and we're really struggling with getting them to actively flex their arm, flex their shoulder up to 180 degrees because we have to get them there for phase 2. Okay, that doesn't tell me anything. So they can't raise their arm past 100. They can't raise their arm to 180 degrees. That tells me nothing. When I say that tells me nothing, I don't know what the problem is. Is it a capsular restriction? Is it local tissue tightness? Is it a strength issue, a force production issue? What's the issue? So my next question is, well, why can't they raise their arm above their head? Why can't what's limited? What's the clinical problem? I think it's just deltoid strength. Their deltoid is not strong. Okay, wonderful. That's a very specific problem. That's a very specific thing. we have a specific adaptation we can target. Force production of the anterior villal deltoid. Very simple. So now, just to be sure, I asked a couple of questions. Have you done joint homes? Yeah. Are there any joint capsule restrictions? No. Okay, so now I'm really thinking we're dialed in. This is a force production issue. And so the words came out of my mouth. I think the force production issue of the deltoid, you need to focus on improving the deltoid strength. We've already been doing that. Okay, so now I'm going to translate the words that they said into Brandon language. We've already been doing that. What I heard is, you don't know what you're doing, you did it wrong, or you're just saying that to appease me because you don't want to look stupid. But obviously, whatever you did wasn't working. Because if it was working, their arm would be above their head. Does that make sense? So I'm like, okay, let me go back, look at your charts, see what you guys have been doing, see if I can find something for us to improve on. So I go back and I look, and they had been doing their priority the last 3 clinical visits, so last week and a half. We see patients twice a week, so 3 visits a week and a half. In the collegiate setting, that could be 2 days, 3 days, 1 day. Last week and a half, the clinical priority had been anterior deltoid strengthened. And I go and I look, and in an hour treatment session, each session, they were routinely spending 8 to 16 minutes on anterior deltoid strengthening. So, if you tell me the number 1 priority of your rehab is to strengthen the anterior deltoids, we have an hour with that person. How much time would you feel is appropriate to secure that what you did actually prioritized anterior deltoid strength? You have an hour. How much time do you think would be how much time do you need to dedicate to that? That's your number 1 priority. What's the minimum amount of time you think would you feel comfortable with? If I'm standing here judging you guys, this is your patient, and you know what I'm looking for. How much time do you want to show that you spent with that patient working on anterior deltoid strengthening so that I wouldn't ask you questions about why you didn't spend enough time? What do you think is the minimum amount of time I would consider? 30, 40. At least 30 minutes. At least 30 minutes. Why 30 minutes? We have an hour with them. You're telling me this is a priority. The bulk of your time needs to be spent working on this. If it's anything less than 30 minutes, that's not the bulk of your time. They had spent anywhere between 8 and 16 minutes a visit with them, working on anterior deltoid strengthening. They were addressing it. They were doing it. They even knew that it was a priority, but they didn't prioritize the priority. You asked them, hey, what are you working on today? What's your clinical priority? Anterior deltoid strengthening. They gave me the right answer. They were doing the right thing, but they didn't get the adaptation they needed because they didn't prioritize the priority. They didn't expose those tissues in that system to the stimulus for enough time to create the adaptation that they wanted. So it goes back in that situation, it was user error. They found the right problem. They were doing the right things. They just weren't doing enough of it. So it was a simple learning opportunity for them. Hey, and it was an easy discussion for me. Hey, all those things you did those 3 days, keep doing those exact same things. But what I want you to do next time they're in, the next 3 visits that they're in, I want you to find a way, spend 30 minutes, 35 minutes, 40 minutes doing all of that stuff. How do we do that? Do the exact same exercises. Here's how many sets you need to do, here's how many reps you need to do, and here's how much rest you need to give them in between each time. And if you do it this way, the question isn't going to be, well, how am I going to spend 40 minutes with strength stuff? The question is going to be, how am I going to get all this done in only 40 minutes? Because now here's the other thing. You hear 40 minutes of strength work. How many of you guys are thinking, man, that's a lot of exercise? It's a lot of exercise. I'm going to be doing it in 40 minutes. Four exercises. More than 4 exercises and you're not following. If you're doing more than 4 exercises, there's no way you're following the variables that you need to be following to get those adaptations. And we'll talk about those right now. Sets and reps, inverse, Typically, the more sets we're doing, the fewer reps we're doing. The more reps we're doing, the fewer sets we're doing. I'll blow this up so it's full size in the notes so you guys have this. Basically, it shows this first one is the rep ski. You tell me what adaptation you want, I'll tell you how many reps you need to do. So if you're wanting to work on hypertrophy, it's anywhere from 5 to 30 reps. If you're wanting to work on strength, skill, sorry. If you're wanting to work on strength, it's 0 to 8 reps. Power, 0 to 6 reps. We're working on local muscular endurance. Where's that one? It's 12 to 75 reps. So you tell me what your adaptation is, I'll tell you how many reps you can do.
Those resting time is changed to 15.
Yes, that's what we'll talk about that one in a second. Yes. So why are we talking about reps first? Because when you tell me that you want to create power, strength, hypertrophy, muscular endurance, and prevent atrophy, there's a total volume I have to hit to create that adaptation. And the first thing I want to know is how many reps, what's my rep range? Because then once I know, if I know that for strength, I need to get a total volume, 20 total reps in, and we're doing sets of 6. I'm sorry, we're doing 6 reps. How many sets are we going to have to do to get to 20 total reps? 6, 12, 18, 24. We're going to have to do we have to do 4 sets to get there. What if we're doing only sets of 3? 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21. Now we have to do 7 sets. So it's going to dictate how many sets we're going to do. So we have to go with the total volume first, because that total volume is what's going to dictate the physiological adaptations we're going to get. Intensity, this is the percentage of your 1 rep max. We have to know this. If we don't know this, if we don't know the intensity, we're going to make it very difficult on ourselves to get the adaptation we're trying to get. We're going after power. We need to be working with 30 to 75% of our 1 rep max. Strength is 80 to 100% or more of our 1 rep max. Hypertrophy is 55 to 95% of our 1 rep max, and endurance is 30 to 80%. What if we don't know our 1 rep max? We need to figure it out. There is a way we'll talk about later on in the semester about how, if we don't know that, because you're not going to know what your 1 rep max is for every exercise, there is a way that we can use the Borg scale. Have you guys heard of that? Rating of perceived exertion. It's a 0 to 20 scale. I don't know. I have a whole little chart that says we're doing this exercise. You ask them to rate where they're at. They'll tell you where they're at. And it'll kind of give us an idea of where they're at percentage-wise in relation to the 1 rep max. So we do have access to that for those exercises that we don't have 1 rep max. But we have to be within this range. This is why oftentimes we do 3 sets of 10 for hypertrophy and we don't see any hypertrophy. Because the weight that we're doing, where's hypertrophy? 55 to 90%. Hypertrophy is the orange bar. Oftentimes, the load that we're lifting is well below that. Kettlebells are wonderful. I love using the kettlebell to teach how to do a kettlebell. I love using the kettlebell to teach people how to deadlift and to squat. They're great teaching tools. They're great from a power standpoint. They're great from a muscular endurance standpoint. From a strength and a hypertrophy standpoint, there's not a kettlebell out there big enough. I don't care who you are. A 24 kilo kettlebell is not going to create hypertrophic changes. 53 pounds is not heavy enough. You take Cal, a 13-year-old. He's been doing deadlifts with the 48 since he was 7, 8 years old. He probably got hypertrophic changes from that. He probably, had we exposed him to enough volume, he would have seen those changes. But we're talking about a 6 or 7-year-old, not a grown adult that's deadlifting the 24 kilo kettlebell for 3 sets of 10. That's not enough volume. Kettlebells are wonderful for power. They're wonderful for endurance. They're a great way to teach people how to do squats and deadlifts and all these other things, but we have to transition from the kettlebell. And I'm the kettlebell guy. We have to transition from the kettlebell if our conversation involves strength or hypertrophy. The volume, the intensity is just not going to be high enough. Frequency, how frequently we're training these individuals and exposing their systems to this training is going to be very dependent upon their recovery. Recovery is, we train today, so we train on Tuesday, we have a rehab session on Tuesday. Recovery is the time from right now when we finish until your next rehab session. So if I just got done treating you and it's almost 9 o'clock on Tuesday, if I want 48 hours of recovery, I want to see you on Thursday or Friday. This is where one of the downfalls, so in the clinical world, one of the downfalls is we typically can only get 2 to 3 visits per weekend because we have a limited number of visits. The patients have to come see us, they have to drive, they have to work out their schedules, all that stuff. So we have trouble getting enough frequency in a 7-day week to create the adaptations. In the college setting, you have the opposite. Every day, which is typically the standard when somebody's hurt, every day we're not giving them enough recovery. So you might have to be very strategic in what you're doing so that we can, to fall within the rules of what you have to do. We have to do rehab today. And I'm going after hypertrophy. Well, I know if I'm going after, we're going after hypertrophy. So I have to give them 48 hours. So I might be really focused on quadricep hypertrophy today. We're doing lots of isolated stuff, working on my quads, working on the hamstrings, whatever we're going after hypertrophy on. But I have to see them tomorrow. But I also know that fully leverage everything I just did. I have to give their body adequate time to recover for those physiological adaptations to occur. Because remember, the adaptations don't occur during the training. The adaptations occur during sleep and that recovery time. So if I don't have adequate recovery, we're not going to get adaptation. So I have to do the hypertrophy stuff today, but I also have to see them the next day. We're going to do something else. We're not going to focus on hypertrophy. We might spend more time doing soft tissue stuff today. We might spend more time doing lymphatic stuff today. We might spend more time working on range of motion, just getting them moving today. But we're not going to repeat what we did yesterday. Because then we've done the thing that we needed from a physiological standpoint. We've also done the thing that we needed from a process standpoint. My boss expects me to see this person every day. The coach wants them in every day. But if I just repeat the same workout every single day, you're not going to get the adaptation. You're breaking your process is stopping the physiology. It's breaking down the physiology and not allowing the physiology to take place. So we will oftentimes have to get creative with that to work within the confines that we have. If we're only doing exposing the system to 1 day of stimulus, you're not likely to get any of the adaptation. So again, let's go over to, I just said this like 3 minutes ago. It's a Foster. I keep thinking Cooper. It's not Cooper. Foster. I'll remember it eventually. We go over to Foster. Somebody, I guarantee today's Tuesday. So all the bench presses will be open because International Bench Press Day, if you're a man, you have to bench press on Monday. It's in the man code. Open it up. It's not even the fine print. It's in the bold print. On Mondays, we bench press. So all the bench presses are open today. You'll find somebody, today's leg day. And it's the only day they're doing legs. And they're going to kill it on legs. They're going to walk out. I mean, I love watching the Instagram videos of the people that have the crazy leg days and they're just all jello-y. That's wonderful. But if you only do that 1 day a week, you're suffering for nothing. Because next week you're going to come in, you could do the exact same workout. No adaptation took place because there's not enough frequency. You're getting too much recovery. If you want to improve your endurance and you only run 1 day a week, but you kill it on the day that you run, just stop. You're not going to create any adaptation with that. We have to have, we can't have too much recovery. For any adaptation, we're going to have at least 2, if not 3 exposures a week to get the appropriate adaptations. For some, hypertrophy specifically, though, we can't do it back-to-back days. That's not enough recovery. I told you this didn't work. I'm still trying to use it. Rest is how much break we give them between sets. Rest is typically broken down short, moderate, long. Short is less than 30 seconds. Moderate is 60 to 90 seconds. Long is greater than 3 minutes. When we give them less stress, it's more of a metabolic strain. When we give them more stress, we get greater recovery in between. Less metabolic stress, less metabolic strain on the system. We typically see less anabolic drive. What does that mean? If I have less of an anabolic drive, what's the one goal? What is the one goal of strength that I cannot achieve with 3 minutes of rest? Hypertrophy. So if my goal is hypertrophy, look at any power lift. When I was with Olympic weightlifting, we would have monster 3-hour training sessions. They would do their squats. It was amazing. It was wonderful. First day I showed up, I'm like, this is weird. Here's a platform. Here's all the weights. Here's the bar that we're using. And right behind it is a chair. And behind every platform, everybody's chair was different. And they all had stuff next to their chair, you know, like magazines and, you know, like soft tissue tools and food and drinks and stuff. I'm like, okay, this is weird. I'm like, wonder what that's all about. This is my platform. You don't train on my platform. This one's mine. This is my chair. This is my stuff. You don't mess with it. I come in, they were doing squats. I do my sets of 3 squats. I sit down, grab my magazine, read. Might talk to the coach a little bit. Okay, yeah, I need to do this on the next set. Okay. Set it down. 5 minutes later, get back up, do my next set of squats. Sit here 3 to 5 minutes, talk to the person next to me. They would train for 2 hours at a time. 75% of the time was sitting down. Now, when they were on the platform and when they were lifting, we're talking weights that 2 or 3 of us together in this room couldn't move. The girls. Extremely high intensity. They weren't going for hypertrophy. They were going for force output and power. They were very specifically training for that. They didn't want an anabolic drive. They needed a fresh nervous system. So they had the rest for 3 to 5 minutes or more. The higher their intensity, when they got up to close to their PRs, they were taking 5 to 8 minutes in between sets because they needed that nervous system to stay fresh. They're not going to get hypertrophic changes with that. If I want hypertrophic changes, we're now here in the short to moderate. Post-op patients, one of the benefits of the moderate rest is you get increased capillary mitochondrial density. Following a surgery, I need that. Increased blood flow, I need that. So controlling the rest in between can give us very specific adaptations as well, which is why you tell me what adaptation you want, and I will give you very specific parameters for weight, for sets, for reps, and for reps. 60 to 90 second rest, we see a huge spike in anabolic hormone production, which means if your goal is hypertrophy, 60 to 90 seconds is where you're going to rest. I'm going to do my set of bicep curls. I'm going to rest 60 to 90 seconds. As soon as 60 seconds hits, I'm back on the bar. We're doing bicep curls. That's the most anabolic environment I can create. And if my goal is hypertrophy, that is an anabolic change. Improved hydrogen buffering. If my goal is muscular endurance and local energy production, I need to stay in that 60 to 90 second window as well. If my goal, though, is power, my goal is force production, where my goal isn't necessarily around an anabolic drive, it's about the nervous system, I need to have at least 3 minutes of rest.
Does rest mean like total rest? I mean, non-active one, or they can just do like walking, like again, adjusting the level of it.
It depends what we're talking about. So if post-op ACL patients and we're going after improved power and we do some broad jumps, that 3 minutes, their lower body needs to be resting. We can do stuff upper body wise, but lower body wise, we need to be resting. Does that mean they need to be sitting down? Not necessarily. The other problem with this is if I sit down in between sets of squats, when I stand up, it takes me a little bit to get moving again. So you kind of have to offset that as well. I don't want to, in that in-between set, I don't want to do something else that's really challenging the lower body. I might need to be moving just a little bit to keep things flowing, to keep blood flow moving, just to keep the tissues loose. But I'm not trying to get in as many steps as I can get or doing something else with that. I can do something upper body wise, as long as it's not too strenuous that increases heart rate, blood flow, stuff like that. And same thing for upper body. We want to try and let that rest as much as we can. So when we look at it all together, nice little fancy chart that has all of this mixed in. Speed, power, strength. I want to give myself 2 to 5 minutes. Hypertrophy, if I'm going over that night, that 3 minutes, it's way too much. 30 to 90 seconds is the most optimal. We won't talk about the endurance type stuff. Muscular endurance, again, 30 to 30 seconds. Don't really want to go over 3 minutes of rest with that. We do rehab for that individual to have the opportunity to recover. Because when they're recovering, that's when all of these physiological adaptations are taking place. Remember, neuroplastic change doesn't happen right now when I'm in this drill. Neuroplastic change happens when I sleep. The physiological adaptations to the exercise I'm doing don't happen right now. They happen when I sleep. They happen in that recovery period. So we have to have enough recovery in between our training sessions for those physiological adaptations to take place. We're talking about hypertrophy or anything where we have a large amount of fatigue. That person that had the crazy hard leg day, they need at least 48 hours of recovery in between. They don't need 7 days of recovery before they come back to leg day, but they need at least 48 hours of recovery. If we're talking, the nice thing about speed, power, and force production, because our goal isn't fatigue, we can give them, if that's something that if our goal is force production, we can do that every day. 24 hours of recovery is about all they need. So where we might not be able to do back-to-back days is in a clinical setting. If I see somebody at 3 o'clock today, and our goal is force production, I see them at 3 o'clock today, and then they're on my schedule tomorrow at 9 in the morning. That's 2 different days, but I don't have 24 hours in between them. So I might need to adjust what I'm doing to give them adequate recovery. So about 24 hours. And we can do that in those 3 because we don't typically, because we're having a large chunk of rest in between sets, we don't see the systemic fatigue build up like we do when we're talking about hypertrophy or endurance type training. The more intense the training, the more aggressive the recovery strategy needs to be. This is where, another change, if I can make in the profession of athletic training, our home exercise programs are awful. Awful. What we need to be doing, or what we can do better, with our home exercise programs are tailored towards recovery. Not getting better. Listen, if you want somebody to get better, and if we're skilled at what we do, why are we sending them home with the exercises that we're having them do in rehab? Because if they can do the exercises at home, they can do the stuff at home, and they don't need us, then why is coming to see us, why is it so much better? Where we can really leverage this is we do all the skill work, all the tough stuff, all the technical stuff in our session with them, but then their home exercise program is actually a home recovery program. Here are the things I need you to do to promote recovery. So that in that time away, they're actually recovering so that we can do more while we're training. This is one of the areas where one of the mindsets, sometimes it's right, in this area it's wrong. Anything is better than nothing is absolutely a horrible mindset when it comes to rehab. Because again, I need to expose them to a training stimulus right now. And then for the next 48 hours, the best thing for them isn't just doing anything, it's doing recovery things. I need them to recover. I don't need them to comment. I don't need to do deadlifts today trying to create hypertrophy, if that's my goal. I don't need to do this today and then think, well, more is better. Anything better than nothing. Let's do more deadlifts the next day. I just blunted the recovery. I just stopped the physiological adaptation because I exposed them to something that's making them work. What would be better is we do deadlifts today. We focus on hypertrophy today. And tomorrow, I just want you to walk for 5 minutes. I want you to foam roll. I want you to go through these mobility drills because your quads are probably going to be a little bit sore. You might feel a little bit in your hamstring. I'm going to teach you how to decongest those areas to get the fluids, to get the tissues moving, to promote the recovery, not to promote the adaptation. Our skill set is adaptation. Our home exercise skill set needs to be recovery and being able to be independent. We put all that together on a fancy little chart that looks like this. Last few things. We're talking about offsetting atrophy. The goal is to maintain the action potential propagation. We put somebody in the boot, we have to maintain their nervous system. They need at least 100 reps per week per muscle to maintain that. Here's the nice thing. With this, we can be very isolated. If we just want to work on the anterior tibialis and getting a contraction of the anterior tibialis to offset that, we can do that. We want to work on the gastroc-soleus, we can do that. Well, Brandon, what if we're concerned about a fracture of the ankle and that's why we have it in the boot? We don't want any ankle movement. Wonderful. How can we create muscle contraction without ankle movement? How can we do that? It's one of the staples of being an athletic trainer. Nice. Even scaled down from isometrics. You guys had a whole class devoted to this. E-stim. We can put E-stim pads on to create a contraction, a low-level contraction, because that contraction that we feel is just a propagation of an action potential that's created by electricity, not by our nervous system. We need to propagate action potentials. So if the physician says, I don't want their ankle to move at all, so we can't do any kind of plantar flexion, dorsiflexion to get the gastroc, the anterior typical, and that's fine. We can put E-stim on them. There's some very specific parameters, but we can use E-stim to get that contraction to maintain that action potential propagation to slow down the process of action. We need to do this daily. This is one of those. We're not building up high levels of fatigue. This is all about the nervous system. Since it's all about the nervous system, we don't have to have a large amount of recovery because there's not a lot of waste products build up. So this is something that we can do daily. Low level, high return on this. If our goal is hypertrophy, remember, hypertrophy is driven by volume, total number of sets and reps. We need to be doing at least 10 to 25 sets per week per muscle. Intensity is going to be a little bit lower, 55 to 90%. We're going to have 30 seconds rest, 30 seconds to 3 minutes of rest. If we're talking about hypertrophy, we can get into isolation. If we're talking about hypertrophy, bicep curls are wonderful if we want to grow the biceps. We can be very joint and muscle specific when we're talking about hypertrophy. So if you tell me that your goal is biceps hypertrophy and you're doing TRX rows, probably not the greatest option because TRX rows, we're getting a lot of things working. If I want biceps hypertrophy, I'm going to focus on the biceps. We're going to be very isolated to the biceps. We have a very specific goal. Could I do TRX rows? I could. But if that's the only exercise I'm doing to create biceps hypertrophy, it's not going to be the most effective. I would need to do that with something else that can be very specific to the biceps. If you tell me though that strength is what we're doing, strength is the adaptation that we're going after, and you're doing bicep curls, hold on. So we start talking strength, we need to be focused on the movement, not on the joint, not on isolation. So if you tell me you're working on upper body strength, force production, now that's where TRX row becomes a priority. We're not going to be doing the joint isolated things because that's hypertrophy. The thing to remember about strength, it's intensity driven, which is why we see the intensities at 80 to over 100%. This is why if you're telling me you're working on strength and you're using a 24 kilo kettlebell, you're not going to create an adaptation. You're not going to create a strength adaptation. We have to be at a very high intensity to create strength. Why do we have to be at a high intensity to create strength? Because we need the nervous system to be completely engaged. If you think about, go back to exercise physiology, the stronger the muscle contraction, the only reason that the muscle contraction gets stronger is because more muscle fibers are used. Why are more muscle fibers used? Because there's a higher neural drive to the muscle, which means more nerves to the muscle are activated, which means more muscle fibers are going to be activated. How do I get more muscle fiber activations? A higher load. I have to have more weight on the bar. I need to be using all of the fibers of that muscle I'm going after that area. So the intensity has to be higher to get a higher neural drive. This one we need around 24 hours of recovery, long rest periods within each set, and we're going to do these relatively early in the training session with this person. Talking muscular endurance. When we're talking muscular endurance, this is a local adaptation. This isn't systemic endurance. This is a local muscle adaptation, energy source. You need to know exactly the thing that you want to improve and do that a lot. So there's a race I'm doing coming up in November, early November. It's a 7-mile race, and intermixed in that 7-mile race, there's different stations where you have to do different exercises. And for whatever reason, each station is a different exercise, but out of the 7 stations that we have to go to, 5 of the 7 stations involve some type of push-up. What's 5 times 25? 125. So over the course of that race, I'm going to have to do 125 push-ups. If I'm having to do and you do 25 push-ups at each station. So you get to the station, you do the 25 exercises, the 25 reps, you go to the next station. Just so happens that out of the 7 different stations, 5 of them involve some version of a push-up. So I'm going to end up having to do 125 push-ups, 25 at a time. Is that a force production issue? No. Is that a local muscular endurance issue? Yes. So I need to make sure that I have adequate ability to generate enough force to be able to do a push-up. I have to have a base level of force endurance, of force production. But guess what my training is shifting towards? It involves a lot of push-ups. A lot of push-ups done in sets of 25. Because that's very specifically the type of endurance I'm going to have to do. I'm not doing bench press, I'm not doing bicep curls, I'm not doing TRX rows, I'm not doing any of this other stuff, because the thing I have to do is very precise, and I know exactly what that is. So when we know what the task at hand is, we can be extremely precise with that. Vary the amount of rest I have, low volume. The reps are going to be in that 25 to 30 range, just so that, again, it's very specific to the task that's at hand in front of me. If I'm having to do something where instead of 125 push-ups, what if I have to do a lot of squats? Guess what I'm going to be doing? Something that is very close to that. I think that's all I want to talk about. Any questions about the physiology stuff? First thing, know the adaptation that you're going for. You have to know the adaptation. Once you know the adaptation, you know the variables that you have to manipulate to get there. Exercise is the least important of those. Once you know what the priority is, you have to stick to the priority. And we can't undervalue the recovery between each one of our training sessions because that's where the physiological adaptations are taking place. That make sense? Any questions?